Is that your wife? Both of you are defective.
Shane sneered at Kathy, making my body shake with anger.
I'm fine. Let's just go home.
Kathy's voice sounded calm, but I could tell she was furious. Shane snorted dismissively, a defective person acting all high and mighty, and walked away. He didn't understand anything. He didn't realize that every word he said to us was an irreparable mistake. The Monday after our argument with Shane, I went to work as usual. As soon as Shane saw me, he came at me.
Why are you here? Why don't you just move into a nursing home with your wife?
Could you stop insulting my parents?
The one who suddenly entered our office was my son, Tony.
Tony, what did you just say?
Shane's face turned pale. He must have been so shocked that he couldn't speak. That the executive director of this company, Tony Redford, is my son. I am Robert Redford, 64 years old. I work at a food processing company. I joined this company when I was 57, 7 years ago. I never thought I would change jobs at that age. The company I used to work for was fairly large, and the salary was better than most. However, due to certain circumstances, I had to leave that company. My wife, Kathy, was in an accident that resulted in a spinal cord injury, leaving her paralyzed and in a wheelchair. Kathy and I were college classmates. We started dating because we were in the same seminar, and got married in our second year as working adults. I knew we got married quite early compared to others. But I was determined to marry Kathy and wanted to live with her as soon as possible. 3 years after our marriage, our son Tony was born, and 2 years later, we had a daughter. I worked for a company that required frequent nationwide travel, and I still feel sorry for leaving child rearing to Kathy. We built our house near Kathy's parents' home because I was often away. Kathy's mother was very supportive with childcare and housework, and I could never repay her. Time passed, Tony got married, and had a child. Our first grandchild, Jake. Tony and his wife rented an apartment near us and often brought Jake over to visit. When Jake was 2, and Tony's wife was about to return from maternity leave, an incident occurred. That day, Tony's wife left Jake with Kathy to go to the hair salon. She usually went to a salon with daycare, but Kathy said,
Why don't you take a break and relax?
She offered to take care of Jake. Jake was very attached to Kathy, and it wasn't the first time she had taken care of him. On their way back from the park, a truck ran a red light and hit them. Kathy shielded Jake, who escaped with minor scratches, but Kathy was seriously injured and required emergency surgery. She barely survived, but the reality was harsh. The doctor told us that Kathy had a spinal cord injury and would be paralyzed from the waist down, unable to walk, and would need a wheelchair. I will never forget Kathy's words at that time, as she cried.
I'm really glad it was me.
Kathy had always been a kind person who never spoke ill of others. She was relieved that she could protect Jake and was glad it was her and not Jake's mother who was paralyzed. For me, it was heartbreaking that Kathy would never walk again. I knew how much she loved exercising, how she jogged daily to prepare for marathons, and how it was her passion. But reality couldn't be changed. So I quit my previous job to take care of Kathy and joined my current company. Since becoming paralyzed, Kathy has often fallen ill. She quickly gets a fever or becomes anemic when she's tired. The doctor says it's due to the stress of not being able to live as she used to and the lack of exercise, and there's nothing we can do. Because of this, I often have to take time off work and rely on others to cover my tasks. Yesterday, Kathy had a high fever when we woke up, so I had to take her to the hospital and take the day off. Of course, I feel guilty, but Kathy is my top priority. I apologize for taking the day off yesterday. As soon as I arrived at work, I went to apologize to the manager of my department, Shane Dawson. Shane glanced at me, annoyed, and clicked his tongue.
You say your wife is weak, but I find that hard to believe. You take so many sudden days off every month. Try to think about our situation too.
I've explained to everyone, including Shane, that Kathy is paralyzed and I have to take time off for her care. I made it clear to Shane when I joined this department, but it seems he didn't take it seriously and has forgotten. It's not something I want to keep repeating, and the other employees understand, so I don't bring it up.
Plus, you leave on the dot every day. It's like you're not taking your job seriously.
The reason I leave on time every day is that Kathy is waiting for me at home. Despite being paralyzed, Kathy manages most of the housework. It's thanks to her efforts, but I honestly wish she would take it easy. So I try to spend as much time as possible at home by leaving work on time. Of course, I finish all my work before heading home. The company's policy encourages leaving on time without unnecessary overtime, but Shane doesn't share this view. To him, leaving on time is slacking off.
Today, 2 employees are absent, so you'll take over their work.
What? I frowned at Shane, who was smirking. Our department's tasks are mostly individual work. We are expected to complete the necessary clerical tasks every day without fail and accurately. Each person handles the daily tasks without fail. Yesterday, 2 colleagues split my workload. So, taking on the work of 2 absent employees is nearly impossible. Are there no other employees available? It's a bit much for one person to handle everything alone. Our department's tasks must be completed the same day. They're like daily closing tasks that can't be postponed to the next day.
When you take days off, other employees cover for you. Are you saying you won't return the favor? That's just selfish. As long as you finish by midnight, the system has no issues, so you should be able to do it.
Shane seemed determined to make me work overtime. He's been harsh since I joined the company 7 years ago. Shane is 7 years younger than me. He probably didn't like having an older subordinate.
It annoys me that we have a useless old man close to retirement in our department. I can't understand why they hired someone like you. You'd be better suited for a part-time job collecting carts at a supermarket.
Shane is always complaining to me like this. Sometimes it's annoying, but there's no other company as flexible as this one. I need the money for Kathy, so I have to endure it. I let out a small sigh. Let me get back to work. And left the scene. I started working, wondering what time I'd be able to go home after finishing the work of 3 people. In the end, I didn't get home until after 10 p.m. I had informed Kathy that I would be late, but I realized I needed to have a serious talk with Shane to prevent this from happening again. When I got home, the living room lights were off. It was too early for Kathy to be asleep, and I felt a sudden sense of dread as sweat began to pour down my body. I hurriedly searched the house but couldn't find Kathy. My mind went blank as I called her cell phone. She couldn't be outside, but if something had happened to her. The thought made me tremble. I heard her phone ringing from inside the house and followed the sound to the open door leading to the balcony. There, I found Kathy lying unconscious. She didn't respond when I called her name. I immediately called an ambulance, and Kathy was rushed to the hospital. As it turned out, her wheelchair had tipped over on the balcony, and she had lost consciousness without being able to get up. It seems she tried to water the plants on the balcony I usually did, but since I told her I'd be late, she decided to do it herself. It was midwinter, and Kathy's life was in danger lying unconscious on the balcony. I blamed myself harshly for taking on Shane's unreasonable work. To stay with Kathy, who was hospitalized for observation, I took the next day off work. When I returned to work, I would have to explain everything to Shane again. And make it clear that I couldn't work overtime. Kathy was discharged on Saturday. The tests showed no issues, and I breathed a sigh of relief. Please, don't overdo it anymore.
I've gone out on the balcony before. This time, I just happened to fall.
Kathy seemed exasperated as I kept bringing up the incident. But the sight of her collapse had been so shocking that it felt like it took years off my life. While pushing her wheelchair near our home, I saw a familiar face approaching.
Hey, Robert, is that you?
I forced a smile and nodded at the last person I wanted to see. I was worried he might say something about me taking a day off. If that happened, Kathy might feel uncomfortable, and that was my only concern.
You took another day off yesterday. How much more trouble are you going to cause the company?
I'm sorry, but I had a reason. I'll explain everything on Monday. I couldn't explain Kathy's situation to Shane here and now. Honestly, I just wanted him to disappear from Kathy's sight as soon as possible. But my hopes were in vain as Shane smirked at Kathy in her wheelchair.
Is that your wife? Both of you are defective.
What?
Kathy, who had been in a daze, seemed shocked by these words. I was also stunned by Shane's remark, which was much worse than I had anticipated.
Oh, I remember. Your wife can't move her lower body, right? How can you live with a woman like that?
Shane's words were utterly insensitive and showed no concern for Kathy. He didn't know how she ended up like this, and he shouldn't be saying such things. How can you say something so cruel? My wife was injured protecting our grandson and became paralyzed. I'm incredibly proud of her.
That's just pretty talk. Deep down, you hate taking care of a defective person, don't you? If my wife ended up like that, I'd divorce her without hesitation.
Seeing Shane look at Kathy with disdain made me tremble with rage. Calling someone's wife defective is inhuman. Kathy seemed unable to process what was happening. I had never told her about the mistreatment I received from Shane at work. Apologized to my wife. I don't care about myself, but I won't tolerate insults to her.
What difference does it make if you won't tolerate it? I don't know what connections got you hired, but you're a burden to this company. You take frequent days off, leave on time every day, and can only handle simple clerical tasks. There are plenty of people who can replace you.
Shane's words were all true to some extent. I am a burden to the company. But I didn't deserve to be told off by Shane like this.
Don't bother coming in on Monday. I'll tell the president I fired a defective employee. You and your wife are a perfect match, both useless to society.
I couldn't take it anymore. I felt the urge to punch him for the first time in my life.
Robert, don't.
Kathy, instantly understanding my thoughts, spoke quietly. Hearing her voice, I felt my anger cool down.
I'm fine. Let's just go home.
Kathy's voice seemed calm, but I could tell she was furious. Shane snorted dismissively.
A defective person acting all high and mighty.
And walked away. He didn't understand the irreversible mistake he had just made. The Monday after Shane's cruel words, I went to work as usual. Even though he had told me not to come, he didn't have the authority to fire me.
Why did you bother coming in? You won't be able to work anywhere else, though. I'm heading to the president's office now. You might want to start packing your things.
Shane must have thought I was a fool for showing up. He had the same condescending attitude as when I saw him on Saturday. I'm not officially fired. Besides, I expect an apology for the insults to my wife.
What?
Shane frowned at my suddenly confrontational attitude. He might have thought of me as just a punching bag who would take anything. I can handle any insult if it's just directed at me, but it's different when it comes to Kathy.
You're getting cocky. An old fool near retirement, daring to defy me. Why don't you just move into a nursing home with your wife?
Can you stop insulting my parents?
The one who suddenly entered our office was my son, Tony. Tony was glaring straight at Shane. He must have heard the entire conversation. The other employees, including Shane, stared at Tony in shock.
Tony, what did you just say?
I heard you've been saying terrible things about my parents. And you think you can fire my dad? What gives you that authority?
Tony's tone was calm, but I could tell he was angrier than I'd ever seen him. Shane seemed to sense it too, as his face turned pale. He must have been utterly shocked. That the executive director of this company, Tony Redford, is my son.
What's going on here? Why is the executive director's father in our department? No, but this guy joined the company as a mid-career hire, right? It must be a mistake.
I'd like to ask who could mistake their own father. We share the same last name, so it's impossible, but Shane was trying to laugh it off, avoiding reality.
That's nonsense. Do you realize what you've done?
Tony, having reached his limit, yelled at Shane. Tony wasn't the type to get angry, so when he did, it was quite intimidating. Shane immediately fell silent.
I heard everything from my father. You've been treating him terribly, haven't you? I'm angry at myself for not noticing, even though we work in the same company.
That being said, our company occupies an entire fairly large building. My department is on the second floor, while Tony and the president's offices are on the 14th floor. Moreover, we didn't openly acknowledge our parent-child relationship. Some employees might have noticed due to our shared last name, but we avoided talking to each other at work. So it's understandable that Tony didn't notice what was happening in my department.
Treating him terribly? No way. I was just interacting with him normally.
Do you think I wouldn't find out everything once I got involved? My mother told me every detail of what happened on Saturday. Plus, I've reviewed all the footage from the surveillance cameras in this department.
What?
I knew Kathy had called Tony. They were on the phone for quite a while, so I suspected she was discussing the incident with Shane, but I never thought he'd go as far as checking the surveillance footage.
Every single insult you directed at my father has been recorded. This means our company can file a harassment claim against you.
File a claim? Isn't that going a bit too far?
This seemed to be an unexpected development for Shane. He probably thought he was just giving a little trouble to a mid-career hire like me. He never imagined it could lead to a lawsuit.
I can't believe I didn't notice for so long. Dad didn't say anything because he didn't want me to worry.
Of course, no father would want to tell his son he's being harassed at work and ask for help.
I would have been happy to help you.
Tony shook his head seriously, as I said with a wry smile.
It's because of us that Dad has to work at this company.
Tony's expression darkened as he murmured while looking down. By us, he meant Tony, his wife, and their child, Jake.
It's my fault that Mom became paralyzed. Because we left Jake with her, she got into that accident. If I had prioritized my family over work.
Tony's strained voice was painful to hear. Kathy became paralyzed after Tony's wife left Jake with her to go to the hair salon. At that time, Tony was often recognized for his excellent performance at this company, leading to frequent business trips and accompanying the president on weekends. Later, Tony admitted that he got carried away by being considered for the next president, but it was understandable. This company is quite large with many employees. It's natural to be excited if your name comes up as a candidate for the next president. The problem was that Jake had just been born. Tony's wife was in a state of postpartum depression. With Tony coming home late every day and being away on weekends, it was inevitable that his wife would feel overwhelmed. Tony might have taken childcare lightly, knowing that we lived nearby. Seeing his wife struggle, Kathy offered to take care of Jake, which was understandable.
If I hadn't been away for work, I could have taken care of Jake. Mom wouldn't have had that accident.
No one blamed Tony for Kathy's accident and paralysis. Tony was working hard for his family, and the accident wasn't his fault.
I even took away Dad's important job.
Tony, you shouldn't blame yourself so much. Kathy's accident happened 7 years ago, but Tony still couldn't get over it.
So why did he end up working at our company? Wouldn't it have been better to stay at his old job?
Shane looked puzzled, tilting his head. Tony narrowed his eyes, not liking that Shane was harassing me.
Watch your mouth. My father is a developer who created many pharmaceutical products. He was the head of a famous national university's research lab and has received world-renowned awards. He's even met the President of the United States.
What?
Shane stared at me in shock. It must have been hard to believe that his mid-career subordinate was such a person.
My father has always been exceptional. He graduated from prestigious overseas universities early. It was easier to learn from him than from school teachers, so our house was like a tutoring center on weekends, flocked in by my classmates. I was always proud of my father, who was respected by everyone.
I was good at teaching, thanks to my parents. Both of them were teachers, so I never attended tutoring centers. Growing up with parents who explained things better than my school teachers naturally made me good at studying.
My father started working at the graduate research lab he attended and developed various medicines. He succeeded in developing medicines that were previously thought impossible, leading the pharmaceutical industry. But he was incredibly busy because of it. He often worked weekends and had frequent overseas trips, sometimes spending half the year abroad. But my mother always supported him wholeheartedly.
Believing that the medicines I created could save many lives in the future, I immersed myself in work. The busiest time was when the kids were in middle and high school, and I put a lot of burden on Kathy. Yet, Kathy never complained and kept supporting me.
But after my mother's accident and paralysis, my father couldn't continue working as he did. He had to leave the pharmaceutical industry, though he was missed. There are still many people who need the medicines he creates. I offered to quit my job and take care of my mother, but both of my parents strongly opposed it.
Of course. It was only natural that I would take care of Kathy as her husband. Even if the whole world needed my medicine, I had no doubt about quitting my job if Kathy needed me. We had some savings, but building a completely barrier-free house for Kathy had nearly depleted them. It wasn't feasible to live without working, but with Kathy's condition, it was also hard for me to work as a full-time employee. So, I decided to sell off my assets. I traded in my beloved sports car for a compact car, sold my watches, jewelry, and anything else of value. Even then, the money would barely last us a year, so I had no choice but to sell my late father's prized antique watches. These were watches he had collected from all over the world, precious mementos filled with his memories. But Tony stopped me just in time from selling them.
At that time, I wasn't the executive director yet, but I was highly regarded by the higher-ups. I used that position to plead with the president to hire you. The conditions were that you'd only do easily replaceable clerical work, could take sudden days off without getting fired, would always leave on time, but still receive a full salary.
In hindsight, Tony's demands were quite unreasonable. The president was reluctant at first, but Tony's desperation and his indispensability to the company made him agree reluctantly. Thanks to Tony, I can take care of Kathy while still receiving a proper salary. I'm truly grateful.
Please don't say that. I did something unforgivable.
Even though Tony still blamed himself, such favorable conditions were unheard of elsewhere. I was genuinely grateful. A few years after I joined the company, Tony was promoted to executive director. As a father, I couldn't be prouder.
One of my main reasons for working hard here was so you could have a peaceful time in this department. Yet, I had no idea this was happening behind my back.
Tony glared at Shane, who had been listening in silence. Shane must have realized how dire the situation was.
Harassing my father every day, forcing him to work overtime, and putting my mother in danger. Do you understand how I feel? I want to throw you off this building's roof right now.
Tony's face showed he was dead serious. His anger boiling over.
I'm sorry. If I'd known he was the executive director's father, I wouldn't have acted like that. I thought he was just a burden, doing simple clerical work.
You're the only one who thought that, Shane.
It was a younger employee from the same department who interjected with a voice full of exasperation. Other employees nodded in agreement.
Robert's tasks may have been simple clerical work, but his method was anything but ordinary.
What do you mean?
Shane frowned, puzzled.
He was too fast at everything. In clerical work, it's hard to save time, but Robert's quick thinking allowed him to skip some steps. And he never made mistakes. Even we make mistakes a few times a month, but I've never seen Robert make a single one.
When I first joined, this department was overwhelmed with work that didn't match its number of employees. Shane hadn't noticed, but a few younger employees were on the verge of collapsing from overwork. If there were 10 steps to a task, I started by verifying whether skipping steps 2, 3, and 4 would still yield the same result. I completed the evaluation of everyone's tasks within a month of joining.
We all felt Shane was unnecessary, but Robert was absolutely essential. Frequent absences don't matter when you consider his usual work performance.
Tony laughed at the young employee's passionate appeal.
You've earned quite the trust, Dad.
Tony looked at me with a proud grin. I'm happy they're so fond of me.
Of course, you're my dad. Well, since the employees feel this way, I guess Shane is the one who isn't needed in this department.
What?
Shane was stunned by Tony's clear statement.
What do you mean, I'm not needed?
Exactly what it sounds like. You're fired as of today. I already have the president's approval. Plus, we're pursuing the legal action we discussed earlier. And it seems there have been an unusually high number of resignations in this department. We're contacting those former employees now. If we find out you harassed them, what do you think will happen?
As Shane's face turned increasingly pale, it became clear he was involved in the reasons those employees left. In a company with high salaries and good benefits, the only likely reason for leaving would be interpersonal issues.
There's no way you could stay in this company after what you've done to my parents. I told the president that if he didn't fire you, I would resign. He agreed to fire you immediately.
Tony's way of saying, of course, perfectly embodied the term abuse of power. Even from my perspective, it's better without Shane, so I didn't object.
Don't think you can easily find another job. I have no intention of ever forgiving you.
Yikes.
Tony has always been unstoppable when he's angry. If he's saying this, Shane's future is undoubtedly bleak.
Hey, Robert, you're his dad. Do something. This is serious.
What can I do? Shane, now completely terrified of Tony, clung to me as a last resort. Why he thought I'd help him in this situation, I'll never know. The one who doesn't belong in this department is you, Shane. I've always thought so. Without you, the work would flow much better.
What?
Shane's face twisted as I spoke with a smile. I've interacted with many people, but you are by far the most foolish and spiteful. Usually, even the least intelligent people try to improve, and the spiteful ones have some redeeming qualities. But in 7 years of working together, I haven't found a single good trait in you. I'm usually good at finding people's strengths, so this is quite rare. Tony couldn't help but laugh out loud. Other employees chuckled as well. Now, let's all get back to work. We've lost a lot of time. Until we get a new manager, I'll be in charge. So, just like usual. The employees nodded and laughed, got it, as I looked around.
All right, I'll get back to work too. Dad, I'll bring Jake over to visit soon.
Thanks for everything. Tony delivered a final, stern, get out of this company, to Shane before leaving the office. Shane stood there, too stunned to respond. After that, Shane was immediately fired and started applying to various companies, but was rejected at the application stage every time. Of course, Tony was pulling the strings behind the scenes. He sent an email to our business partners, stating, "Do not hire Shane Dawson. Please inform your partners as well." Such an extreme move would typically be unacceptable, but Tony seemed to have significant power in this industry. Being the next president of our company and holding various other influential positions, he had strong connections with politicians and the police. Few companies would dare to oppose Tony. With Tony thoroughly ensuring Shane's exclusion, finding another job would be nearly impossible for him. Unable to secure re-employment, Shane's wife eventually left him. As Tony had mentioned, the former employees who left our department did so because of Shane's harassment. The company is covering all legal fees, and preparations for the lawsuit are underway. Shane will face a substantial compensation claim, an amount he won't be able to pay off in his lifetime. Having lost his job and family, Shane now lives in a cheap apartment, juggling multiple part-time jobs. Though he's barely making ends meet now, a hefty compensation claim is imminent. He won't be able to cover it with just part-time work, leading him to debt, but there's a limit to how much he can borrow with part-time income. He's likely to turn to loan sharks, leading his life toward utter ruin. As for me, today I returned home on time again and spent a peaceful evening with Kathy. Today, salmon was on sale, so I made grilled salmon. You love it, don't you, Kathy? After finishing work on time, I stopped by the local supermarket and cooked dinner. Back when I had my previous job, I couldn't even make a simple dish, but now I can cook almost anything.
Yes, I love grilled salmon.
Kathy said with a happy smile.
This is the happiest I've ever been.
What? What did you say?
Ever since you joined your current company, everything has been wonderful, and I'm truly happy.
When she says since I joined my current company, she means since she became paralyzed. Despite her restricted life, why does she feel happy?
You were always so busy with work, never home. Raising the kids was fun, but it was so hectic, I hardly remember it. Since I became paralyzed, you've been home every day, and we spend weekends together. That makes me so happy.
Kathy smiled gently, but I was speechless with surprise. She never complained about my constant business trips, but she must have felt very lonely. She just couldn't say it. Kathy. I'm sorry, I was so focused on myself.
You have nothing to apologize for. You're here with me now. The past 7 years have been tough, but I see it as a gift from God. Being able to eat the meals you cook and do household chores together. I sometimes wonder if it's okay to be this happy.
Everyone's idea of happiness is different. For Kathy, happiness was spending peaceful time with me. I felt very fulfilled these past 7 years too. Let's share this with Tony. Tony might cry, but I wanted to tell him that Kathy and I are truly happy now, so he can stop blaming